Reporting live from the eye of the storm here in.
It's the eye of the storm, letting it rain and snow and sleet. Okay, hey, what's up, buddy?
What's up, dude?
Wow, that mustache, thick, good, like it.
One of my daughters saw that there's gray in my beard, and she asked me if I was going to die soon. I was like, hey, it's not how it works. But she's just associated gray hair with like death.
Oh man, that's fantastic. I love that. That was like her immediate like go-to was like, like you got gray. Does that mean you're gonna die soon?
I'm sure you've gotten lots of praise for the hair video. I loved it. I just thought it was great, and it brings up your own insecurities. So I realized that's one. It's like, oh yeah, like I didn't think I had an issue with that, but when she said it, I just thought like, oh, I'll just shave that off.
Well, it was interesting. I think the hair video was fascinating for me to
I bet when
I post it because I mean, you can see in my recording of it my own wrestling with my thought process on it.
I think that's why it's so good. Yeah.
But at the same time, like a lot of people, you can see their own hangups as they respond, like or not even hangups, but they're where they're at in their perception of themselves, which I found absolutely fascinating. If you go through the comments, like people, because it's all ends of the spectrum, like people are giving like, absolutely save it, do these things, and then the whole other side was like, no way, don't save it, like shave it off. It's the most liberating thing in the world. And like people being like, oh, I did surgery and not enough people talk about it, and like it made me feel so confident. And other people being like, I shaved it off and it was the biggest confidence thing I could ever have, because I realized I didn't need to be controlled by outside forces. I was like, it was cool. It was a fun little watch, or I enjoyed it at least.
Confidence is an interesting word, just because I feel like we're all just kind of winging it. We're all just kind of making it up. Totally. But the person that sounds the most confident is like, oh, well, maybe he's beat the system. Maybe he's the one that's not winging it.
Yeah, no, we're definitely winging it. Definitely winging it. Anyway, let's switch. Let's start with the health fitness question. And this is one I want to chat with you on. And I'm actually just curious your overall thoughts on it. I guess that's all these questions, but placebo. So placebo effect's a real thing, as we all know, right? You can kind of convince yourself that something's happening and it will physically manifest, like nocebo style, right? And placebo and nocebo, I guess nocebo is convincing yourself that's going to happen and then you actually manifest it. Placebo is that you think it's happening, and I guess it kind of still manifests. So like you talk about placebos in often when you're trying to study something, you'll have a placebo group and then you'll have the group who's actually being dosed with it, whatever it is. My question to you is that if something has lots of anecdotal evidence of people having success with it, and the true effect that it's happening from whatever is being suggested is just a placebo effect, is there still value in promoting, like what is the issue there? Is there value in continuing to promote whatever is being touted as a cure or as a way to do things? Like if there's still positive effect happening from it, does it matter that it's placebo? What's the issue there?
Do you have a example by chance? And it's okay if you don't.
Yeah, let's go with ice baths. Let's go with cold therapy. If you think about cold therapy, it's impossible to study cold therapy with a placebo group. You can't be like, oh, that's amazing. Can't be like, you're getting in cold. Yes, you are. It's happening. Like you can't do that. So it's always going to be something that you can't truly see if it's just a placebo or not. But does that matter? If the positive effects that people are having from it are clearly present in many, many people's lives because of this doesn't matter.
Gotcha. Well, that really helps. My answer is pay attention to anything that comes on the scene as being valuable, beneficial, regardless if there's clear documented evidence that it's valid. Ice baths is a great example. I can't find any research that's conclusive to say that it's something that we have to do. However, that could just be that there isn't a study that has been able to control for those things like you just mentioned. So I think number one, pay really close attention to what's happening. But then secondly, and maybe more importantly, don't be bought in just because it's popular. Experiment, but go into that experiment with open eyes that it may not be something that you qualitatively feel is valuable for you. And if it isn't, then you have permission to move on to the next thing. And because it isn't documented, you shouldn't feel bad about that. And I think nutrition is a great correlator to that, right? There's lots of methods, there's lots of ways to go about it. And I think when people latch on to one particular method, the rest of us are like, maybe that's the way to do it. But I think when there's all these different methods, it gives you permission to experiment and just figure out what's worth it for you.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, no, I like that. I yeah, I like that. I think what you're saying about just kind of be willing to experiment. I think especially in the health and fitness space, so much of what's studied is proving what's already been known to work for a long time. So even if they do come around to a conclusive study, it's often something that's been in practice for 20 years. And now they're being like, yeah, it works. And you're like, yeah, we know, we've known for a long time. So I think that being willing to experiment, be open to new ideas that even counter what you're doing is awesome. But I really like the examination of self, of like, let's try this, let's see where it is. And so maybe what would you say would be a quantitative amount of time that you would experiment with something, and you can say maybe give it, you can put it in any realm, say nutrition or ice baths or whatever. Like what's a meaningful amount of time? Because I know a lot of people just hop from thing to thing because they enjoy that. So what's a meaningful amount of time?
I don't think anybody's going to like this answer, but I would say less than 90 days, and you can't say shit about what you just experimented with.
So to break that apart is you have to spend at least 90 days to know anything about it. And I would 100% agree with you. Yeah. I 100% agree with you. I think the people who try stuff for a couple of weeks crack me the hell up.
Oh man, it's so funny. But I remember way back, this isn't the first time that like ice baths have been popular. And it's like we've been in this community for so long. I remember the last wave where that was really popular. And I just remember experimenting with it, not ice baths per se, but ice as therapy, and just thinking like, tried it for 90 days, not really my thing. Yeah. And, just kind of moved on. But through that experimentation, it was really cool just to, I think the value of doing that is not to necessarily prove something right or wrong, but just to be really aware of all the things that it's doing and just see if that works for you.
Yeah. Yep. I think there's valuable content there or valuable information there. It's with the time frame and what you just said about the value is really in examination itself. So cool. Yeah. I like it. I love it. All right, moving on. Kids. So maybe you've heard of this, maybe not, but well, I guess I could ask the question. So how do you promote self-belief, like belief in self and confidence with self, in line without basically creating a need for parental approval? There's a conversation being had by a few, I don't know if I would call them alternative thinkers or what I would call them, but there are people in the child development space who basically say too often in our society where kids are looking for parental approval. So they're like every time a kid does, hey, great job, hey this, hey blah blah blah, like, and I think there's a lot of different sides to this conversation. There's a demographic of people who just don't even acknowledge their children. And then there's a demographic who's just like, oh my God, you're the best person ever. But even within somebody who's like looking to be between those things, like, is it better to say to a kid, I love that you're proud of yourself, versus great job, like, and where's that line drawn for you? Because it's something I wrestle with too. So where's that? How do you examine that? And what do you think about that?
Man, what a great question. Context is everything. So one of the things I struggled with growing up is that I felt like I had power over my parents, and specifically that if I was bad, they would be sad, and if I was good, they would be happy, and that I somehow through my actions could dictate my parents' behavior. And that's something that, like, going unchecked, like, it's still a challenge with people to think like, oh man, I've really got to please this person, or man, really got to be careful with my words. And so, like, some of those constructs in abstract are good things, but when you put them into real life can become really dysfunctional. And so having that as a background for myself, I realized for my kids, I wanted to create some autonomy. And also I wanted them to be proud of themselves for their own effort, not extrinsically motivated by what mom and dad had to say. So I haven't read exactly the people that you're talking about, but there's a couple of things I'm really careful to distinguish as far as like the language that we use. And I smile because I do say that. It's like, hey, you should be really proud of yourself for what you just did. And even though, me saying like, hey, I'm proud of you and you should be proud is a small distinction, I think it's a huge differentiation in what they think. Secondly, I don't blow smoke up their ass. And so, when they do something, instead of saying that was awesome, it's like a really terrible play-by-play commentator. It's like, hey, you really just climbed up that thing, instead of saying like, man, that was so great what you did, because in context, it's not really that great. Like going across the monkey bars is not really that great in comparison to all the things that they can do. But at that moment, to say you totally made it across the monkey bars, you should be really proud of yourself, feels just as good as me saying that was the greatest thing I've ever seen and I'm so proud of you. It feels the same, but the words are different, and therefore I think like how they interpret that moving forward is better.
I like it.
Yeah.
I wonder, I mean, because I don't know anybody who's been raised the way we're trying to do it, with placing it on there. Like, in theory and logically, I can see what you're saying. It makes sense. Like when you think about language and how it kind of permeates our existence and kind of directs what we do, it makes sense. But I have yet to see the outcome of that.
Right. Like, what are the repercussions of doing it that way?
Totally. What do we see with a child who's been raised this whole way to never like need the approval of others? Like we're an organism that lives in conjunction with other people. So if you don't give a shit what other people think, and it's only around self, like there's an extreme on that side too. And I think naturally they're going to be put into, I think human beings will naturally kind of, with the constructs that we have, rely on each other, like and you'll have a desire to please those around you naturally. But it is really interesting to think about. Like I do try to think about that exactly like you're saying, like and promote the other sides of it. But I just wonder, in the long term, does that really do anything? Like, I don't know.
My daughters are getting old enough where I'll say that, and they'll say, well, hang on, what do you think about it? Isn't that
Yeah,
amazing?
they're like calling your bullshit. They're like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't, yeah, cool, man. Like, I know that I'm stoked on myself, but what do you think?
Well, because that conversation we've had, a few times back, it's like,
Yeah,
is Santa real? It's like, well, what do you think about it? So they're really good at like
yeah,
Socratic methoding
I love
their
it.
dad. And one other thought with that is I'm really quick to say, hey, dads, because they're perceptive, and I'm sure your kids are too. I'm sure all kids are, and they're really good about saying like, hey, are you upset about something? And I'll say, yeah, I absolutely am. But that's okay. And also, I just quick and very sensitive when what I think that they're asking is, are you upset because of me?
Right.
And for me to just kind of dialogue with them about like, hey, dad's upset, and yes, I am upset that you did that, but I love you, and here's the action, here's you, and nothing you do can change how I feel about you, but this thing that you did, I am very upset about it. And even though that seems like so exhausting, uh
I think that's important.
yeah, this seems to be worth it. Yeah,
I think that's important personally. I think it's really easy to misconstrue as a child that I
totally.
think what you were saying, the actions that you to feel like the actions that you have control over your parents in some way or another. And I think that that's not a good mentality. So being clear with that, communicating, I think is huge, and continuing to find ways to do that. I think you and I talk from a place of high privilege too, which is interesting, like both
Mhm.
where we are at socioeconomically as well as I don't know, psychologically, like we have the
Mhm.
freedom to think about a lot of things. Whereas I think
Mhm.
even myself, when I find myself stressed in other things, the capacity to have grace and space from and what I'm saying is just it shrinks. Like if I'm not sleeping enough, or if I'm stressed about work or something
Mhm.
like that, and it can very easily just flip. So it's
Mhm.
I'm very thankful, and I'm sure you are, for having the mentality and space to be able to examine these things at all. So if you're out there and you're listening, and you're like, I don't know any of what these guys are talking about. It's like I feel you, man. Like anyway,
Totally. Yeah.
moving on.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of this is from just messing it up so often. It's like, man, I
Oh,
gotta
yeah,
I gotta figure this out.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why we set these up is to chat, because I really enjoy your perspective.
Well,
Anyway,
likewise, man.
last one. Let's go through it. It's kind of touching on faith a little bit, because I know we were eventually going to get into this, but it's not super deep into it. My thought is it's kind of relating to the first question as well, the placebo thing,
Hmm.
where it's like if someone's belief makes them what they believe in spiritually makes them a better person and makes them engage with the world in a more positive way, does it matter what they believe? Like if what they're no matter what it is, does it matter what they believe if it's making them happier and more content and able to integrate with the world in a better way and bring up the people around them?
Hmm. Man, what a good question. This is gonna sound really dorky, but there's terms for this in I guess like theology. It's distinguishing between your orthodoxy and your orthopraxy. Orthodoxy meaning what you believe, and then orthopraxy meaning how you actually live your life.
Hmm.
And so it's hard to argue with someone's way of navigating their life if it ends up being really good for themselves, good for those around them, and that it continues to be that way long term. Now you can argue, what does good mean? Well, maybe a simple way is to say it doesn't do anybody any harm by the way that you act. And so,
Including
that
self.
including self. And so there was
Right.
that's not my original thought. There was a child psychologist, John Piaget, that was looking at just like behavior of kids and just thinking through like, hey, what kind of framework and model could we come up with that just across the board and across cultures, we would say, hey, it's hard to argue that this is a good way to kind of navigate things. And so when you look at that and you could distinguish like, man, all of this person's behaviors seem to be beneficial for himself and for those around him, and it continues to be so, then you have to distinguish, does it really matter? And I think that's what you're asking, what they believe. And, you know, Pat, I don't really have like a great answer, because I think whatever you decide to believe, it is a leap of faith. And that goes with believing any type of theology, or being agnostic, or being atheist. Like there's a leap of faith regardless, because whatever camp you fall into, you can't prove that. At some point, I think you have to keep circling back to what allows you to make the best choices. And just like the first question, there's going to be some differences from person to person. We're never going to be able to fully prove this particular topic. And then I think the big question, which I don't have an answer for, is how do you reconcile those differences?
There's a lot of good information there. I think
I don't know about that.
I think that wasn't a particularly direct answer, because I don't think there is a particularly direct answer. It's not like a yes or no. I would argue that you could just straight up say, yeah, it's I mean, you could say the word, yeah, it's fine. But if you are of if your theology, but if your theology supports that, if people who are not directly in line with your scriptures are somehow incorrectly perceived by a higher deity, then the answer can't be yes, based off of your own practices. But I would also argue that, like, I think there are people who live their life according to almost the exact doctrine, but don't have the the next step. But I think one thing that you said that really struck me was you added a component of long-term, and continue to do so. And I think that a complete belief in self without some sort of external validation from like a higher deity, like, or something in those realm, I don't think as we age and develop and our brain gets wrinklier and stuff, that will continue to be the case. And that's just my own personal perspective, because of kind of where I'm at in life. I was not raised with anything, but like as I age, there's this constant like seeking. And I've heard it described as like a God-shaped hole or whatever it is in a human. But it's a fascinating thing to continue to examine. And I wonder if you can continue to live by your own, these are my morals and my doctrine forever, because there's going to be so many things that slap you in the face with something that challenges that, like, very directly. And you'll realize that you have to like pivot and be like, I don't know. It's definitely something that I think about. And I so in one hand, I think that you could say yes, it's great. But there's also a lot to unpack there, depending on what perspective you're coming from.
Yeah. You know, at some point in this is going from things I've read to like what I personally believe. I really like when I can see something in the world of psychology that matches up with the world of recovery, that matches up with you know, a Judeo-Christian ethic, and it's like a Rosetta Stone. It's like all three of these things are saying the same thing. Like that to me feels like a really good confirmation that we're on to something that should be recognized. And, you know, in all three of those, whether it's, you know, in Alcoholics Anonymous saying like, hey, you need to call on a higher power, but they don't call it God. In psychology, you know, Carl Jung calls it the shadow self or the subconscious. And then in, you know, spirituality, it's just labeled God. Um, I I like the fact that all three of those distinctly different communities can agree that there is something beyond like just this conscious self. And that in my own life has, I think, been helpful to think that there is something beyond like what's personally important for me. And that's been in my marriage and as, you know, a father. Like the hardest thing ever is to, you know, quote unquote, like die to yourself. And I think that that's where some type of belief system that includes that is, I, I I feel so strongly about that that I wouldn't know how to navigate life without having something more important than myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair. Great answer. Well, that's all I got, man. I'm out. I'm out of questions. Hey, this by the way, if you can put your arm up, this was sponsored by Josh Reedy, you know.
I forgot about that.
There he is. There he is. Is
Josh,
that your right hand or left hand?
this is my right.
That's
What's
your right.
yours?
Okay, I missed my left.
Oh,
Yeah. So we
man,
got
some of the same clouds.
dude.
Wow.
Is that all Reedy?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He started with just this little guy.
I remember
and then
that.
Went here and
Yeah.
then just finished it up. You got some great colors too, man.
He's an amazing man. So that guy, well, he'd be a good person to have on here to chat with.
He
But
sure would.
I
He's
don't
a
know how much you
fascinating guy.
great thinker, but we'll say this is sponsored by him. If look up the Great Ibis on the Instagrams. He's a fantastic tattoo artist and amazing human too. He's gone through a lot and has like really, I love talking to that guy.
Well, that's what's so great when you get a tattoo. It's like you know, it's a 6-hour discourse every time. And
Yeah.
man, he's got a good brain on him for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, that's it. You go off, you parent. Thank you, brother.